When you're in the studio painting, there are a lot of people in there with you. Your teachers, friends, painters from history, critics. One by one, if you're really painting, they walk out. And if you're really painting, you walk out. So growing up, art was all around me. My grandfather and granny on my father's side were both painters, and my grandfather died before I was born, and my granny kept his art studio in their house exactly as it was when he was last painting in there. I used to sneak into the studio and I used to sit and I used to imagine him painting. The thought of being an artist and a painter was very mysterious and just fascinating to me. I did my degree in Sheffield in art history, but I really hankered after the materiality of paint in my own practice. And it wasn't until I was 30 that I made a massive decision that I was going to pursue my dream of being a painter. And we went travelling for 6 months. I treated it as an artistic residency. I just drew and painted every day, probably for about 5 or 6 hours a day. I didn't judge what I did. So when I came back from travelling, I set up a studio and I joined the first year of the Turps Art School when it opened up. It was an online course. Every 3 months you had a deadline. You uploaded your images and got feedback on them. It was about the materiality of the paint, and you could really geek out about the different colours, textures, formal elements of compositions and paintings, and really gave me the support that I needed at the time. My studio is at the end of my garden. It's a small but perfect space. In it I have canvases that are waiting to be painted. I have all my works in progress, and I have a lot of drawing works. I have my spray cans, all my paints, my white spirit, huge amount of rags. I often go in and sit there and read in the studio. It's my sort of happy place. So having a home studio really works well for me because it's the continuity of the practice. I usually have about 3 hours of painting in me. If it's a good day in the studio, it's a bit like meditating. I'm aware of what I'm doing, but I'm not at the same time. And I'm following just instincts really, one mark after the other. The most important artist tools I have are a set of brushes that I've had for years. They are intrinsic to my practice. I'm not sure what I would do without them. They make the most voluptuous, satisfying marks. They're probably about 3/4 of an inch. I actually prefer using synthetic brushes. The brush hair seems to stay in a little bit more. The marks you get, the gestures, they're less coarse. A very interesting part of my practice, which has evolved over the last years, is use of spray paint and oil paint. It's the diversity of the marks that it allows you to have. So you can have some sort of very impasto marks with the oil paint, very built up paint next to this very fluffy, powdery, sort of soft marks with the spray paint. And I don't prepare my own canvases, I buy them ready-made. Painting begins with me when I spend time looking at an art historical painting, and then I start the painting usually the next day. So I'm not interested in replicating the image, it's really the memory that I'm painting on, and in some ways I want to paint away from the image. And often I'm turning the painting to kind of disrupt the composition and keep it interesting for me. And what I'm really waiting for is the painter to surprise me. I'm not interested in knowing exactly how it's going to finish looking. It's this kind of, this intention, this sort of going underwater and above water, being aware of something and then losing that awareness. It's between spontaneity and intuition. It's maybe a bit of a dance in the studio sometimes. I think of paintings as existing as material objects, but they also point back to a trajectory of art history. So it's part of a language, I suppose, a visual language. So what I'm doing with my work is I'm searching for this space where I touch on the feel and the presence of the painting. It's an essence of the original work that I'm trying to distill, and it's an acknowledgement of the sort of time, space, place and history all into the mix. Passing of time is central to my work. In the subject matter, obviously flowers are poignant, transient, and they encapsulate the passing of time. Also, I think of my paintings as timelines on a tree. Each layer is built up over time, but it's also integral to the finished piece. And it holds all the kind of evidence of the marks made in real time. Another area I'm very interested in exploring are the formal elements in painting. So by this I mean looking at the speed of the paint, the rhythm of the paint, the colour, how it sits next to each other, the textures. And it's really the contrast and the interesting sort of clashes between these on the surface that I'm interested in exploring. The Flower Gallery at the Fitzwilliam Museum is one of my happy places. It was the first place I encountered Rachel Ruysch's paintings in real life. I find her work exquisite. Her attention to detail and her use of colour is also almost hypnotic for me. Sitting on this bench, looking at these paintings from a distance, you get a sense of the compositions of the artworks, how the colours sit next to each other, and I start to think about how I would apply my own visual language to this. So to paint after Rachel won, I took an older painting that I've been working on, which is what often I do, which creates a kind of archaeology to the piece. I worked into it with spray paints to start with, and then I started applying my process of painting using rags, my fingers, brushes, and white spirit to move the paint around the surface. And I remember distinctly, it was a very intense painting session. I think I only had about an hour and a half. I had a time constraint on me that day, and when I finished painting, I was planning on working back into it the next day. When I did come to look at it later, I realised that actually it was finished, and it had a kind of spontaneity that I really, really found fascinating, and possibly it was a groundbreaking painting for me that I hadn't reached that level before, in the freedom of the gesture and marks and the layers and the tone and the rhythm of the piece. I think is very integral to it. Winning the Jackson's Painting Prize has been the most wonderful experience for me. I had been aware of the prize for a few years, but this was the first year that I'd entered. And I had it in my head, I made a note of the date, and I knew exactly which painting I wanted to enter for it. So each time I got through the round, I was so excited and thankful. I never thought I would win, and I have to admit to being absolutely flabbergasted when I got the email the day before. The prize money's made a huge difference to me. It's taken a lot of pressure off me to have to focus on the selling of my work. It's allowed me time in the studio to experiment and push my practice further.